którą stronę będziemy zwracali się
Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski spoke about this today, about the government's point of view during his exposé in the Sejm. How did the presidential palace react, especially when it comes to Minister Sikorski's words about a strong Europe and the need to strengthen the relations with the United States? But, and here's a quotation, "We cannot be suckers in these relations." How would this look against the backdrop of the still heated conflict over ambassadors? Today I'm checking this. The Polish Sejm, the annual exposé to present the priorities of Polish foreign policy for the whole year. The president is listening to the speech. Radosław Sikorski talks about the Polish raison d'etat, the role of the Polish-American alliance, and the strength of the European community within the EU and NATO. But more about that, and I quote, losers, the opposition, internal struggles with political opponents, and simply patriots.
Wyobraźmy sobie,
let's imagine a weak or dismantled European Union. Outside its structures, a poorer Poland and a heavily armed Germany ruled by a nationalist right wing. Is that what you really want? According to the head of the Polish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, nationalism is about questions concerning Poland's interest in the European Union community, questions about the shape of agreements, sovereignty in creating its own laws, regulations and shaping revenues. There was no shortage of evidence of love for the European Union.
Czy właściwą odpowiedzią na
Would Pole exit or even the dissolution of the EU be the right response to the shortcomings of the European Union? Just as right as throwing a car away for scrap, just because the suspension requires servicing. Except that no one is kicking Poland out of the EU, nor is anyone questioning the sense of Poland's presence in the EU. The right wing is simply talking about assertiveness. I found Minister Sikorski's speech lacking in assertiveness towards the European Commission. Minister Sikorski admitted that the chassis of the car called the European Union is breaking down, to use his words. But I would like to see greater support from the government in repairing the European Commission's activities. It was impossible not to notice the tenderness with which the minister speaks about the European Union and how relatively coolly and reservedly he speaks about the United States. He bluntly calls those who care about the alliance suckers, which is not a term used in diplomatic language. Can we be sure that the interests of the United States will always be the same as those of Poland? We have been and will continue to be a loyal ally of America, but we cannot be suckers. Donald Tusk is delighted. It is also worth realizing that we are doing everything we can to save as much money as possible from the National Reconstruction Plan. Little is said about this, but the delay caused by Law and Justice, the fact we did not receive this money for years, means that we have very little time to use it. Nothing to add, nothing to take away. Minister Sikorski not only pointed out the strategic direction, Berlin and France, which control the EU, but also proved once again how reluctant he is to maintain relations with the United States. Although they are important, he does not treat them as friendly. The European Union has been Sikorski's first choice for years. In March 2022, shortly after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, he posted a message on Twitter saying that he also wanted to go to Kiev. However, he was waiting for permission from the European Parliament. This is also a signal not so much to the US as to political patrons in the European Union. It is also worth noting here that the European establishment's idea is not to push out the United States completely, but to ensure that the United States has no decision-making power in Europe. However, it is still possible to benefit from some military support from the United States. Sikorski is implementing Berlin's policy, and the US wants to break up this German-Russian pact. The founder of NATO said that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization was created to keep the Russians at bay and the Germans under control. Just as the institutions from which 50 ambassadors were dismissed without the consent of the previous president, Andrzej Duda, remain out of control. The current president, Karol Nawrocki, has not approved their successors. We're at the stage where there was a proposal from Deputy Prime Minister Sikorski, my clear counter-proposal, a longer conversation, and we're at the stage where Minister Sikorski, if he is ready to compromise, may reach that compromise, and I am waiting for Minister Sikorski's response. But Sikorski's answer is unchanged. Once again, I appeal to President Nawrocki to sign the applications for ambassadorial appointments in accordance with the law. The law has not changed, so is there not a single candidate among the 49 who meets the requirements? However, there were no proposals for solutions to the most pressing issues for Polish international policy. We did not learn from your speech what budgetary policy Poland intends to pursue in the European Union in the coming years. What climate policy? What policy for regaining competitiveness, treaty reforms, expansion of digital sovereignty? We did not learn this. What we did learn, however, is that you consider Eurosceptics, nationalists, and think tanks publishing reports with specific proposals for institutional reform in the area of treaties or migration policy to be your enemies. A retreat from the United States. This is what was clearly outlined during the 2-hour speech, from a country where the lack of a plenipotentiary ambassador is clearly visible. Negotiations between the United States and Iran are being held in Geneva at the diplomatic mission of Oman, which is acting as the main mediator between the sides. The delegations of both countries remained in separate rooms, and their positions were communicated through Omani diplomats. Oman has maintained relations with both Washington and Tehran for years and has repeatedly mediated between the two, since they do not have direct diplomatic relations. The first part of the talks was technical in nature and concerned the scope of the negotiations and the priorities of both sides. The Iranian delegation emphasized that it had come to Geneva prepared for lengthy negotiations, covering both sanctions and the nuclear program. Our delegation arrived fully prepared, as it did during previous rounds of talks. We have demonstrated our commitment from the very beginning of this process. We are accompanied by experts dealing with the lifting of sanctions and economic issues, as well as nuclear and legal issues. We are ready to continue these talks for as long as necessary. After several hours of meetings, the delegation suspended the talks for consultations with their governments, which diplomats interpreted as a moment to evaluate the proposals presented. The next round of talks focused on the specific terms of a possible nuclear agreement. According to diplomatic sources, the United States presented a detailed list of expectations for Iran, considered one of the most demanding since the resumption of negotiations.
Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. If they try to rebuild a nuclear weapon, that causes problems for us. And in fact, we've seen evidence that they have tried to do exactly that. So the president sending those negotiators to try to address that problem, as the president has said repeatedly, he wants to address that problem diplomatically, but of course the president has other options as well.
Washington is demanding restrictions on uranium enrichment, the transfer of highly enriched material stocks under international control, and the introduction of permanent mechanisms to prevent the rapid restoration of the nuclear program. The American proposals also include an expanded inspection system and long-term guarantees regarding the nature of Iran's nuclear program. Iran, on the other hand, maintains that it will not give up its right to a civilian nuclear program and clearly defines the scope of the talks as limited exclusively to nuclear issues. As has been repeatedly emphasized, the subject of the negotiations focuses on the nuclear issue. Our position is clear both on the lifting of sanctions and on Iran's rights related to the peaceful use of nuclear energy. We have communicated our position to the Omani side very clearly in these two main areas. The talks are being conducted in an atmosphere of clear military pressure. There is an increased presence of US air and naval forces in the region, which, according to the administration in Washington, is intended to strengthen the deterrent effect and increase the pressure on Tehran in the negotiations.
Iran possesses a very large number of ballistic missiles, particularly short-range ballistic missiles that threaten the United States and our bases in the region and our partners in the region. And all of our bases in the UAE, in Qatar, in Bahrain. And they also possess naval assets that threaten shipping and try to threaten the U.S. Navy. So I want everybody to understand that beyond just the nuclear program, they possess these conventional weapons that are solely designed to attack America.
Iran, in turn, warns that further military pressure could lead to retaliatory actions against U.S. installations and allies in the Middle East. Diplomats participating in the talks point out that the very decision to continue negotiations after the first rounds of meetings was seen as a sign of cautious progress. At the same time, they emphasize that the key disputes concern the scope of international control and the future of Iran's nuclear capabilities. The nuclear material we are talking about could potentially be used to produce nuclear weapons. This does not mean that such weapons already exist, but this material exists and could be used in this way. We currently have no way of re-inspecting it, and it is precisely this uncertainty that could lead to very serious decisions.
A motorboat registered in the United States allegedly entered Cuban waters, and its crew allegedly opened fire on a Cuban patrol. according to information provided by the authorities in Havana. 4 people traveling on the boat were killed and 6 others were injured. The neutralized motorboat, registered in Florida, was carrying 10 armed individuals who, according to the preliminary statements by those detained, intended to enter the country for terrorist purposes. The only information available on this subject comes from the Cuban authorities and the local regime's television station. The Americans do not deny that the incident took place, but no further details are available.
Now, I'm not going to comment about any conversations we've had on this topic. Suffice it to say, what it's important to be out there and everyone needs to know is that we're going to have our own information on this, and we're going to figure out exactly what happened. And there are a number of things that could have happened here.
The incident occurred at a time of growing tension in the region, with the United States imposing a blockade on Cuba and pressure mounting for regime change on the island. The country has been struggling with an ever-worsening crisis for years, with 15% of its population leaving in just 4 years.
What the Cuban people should know is this, that if they are hungry and they are suffering, it's not because we're not prepared to help them. We are. It's that the people standing in the way of us helping them, it's their Communist Party. That's who's standing in the way. If they move out of the way, we're more than happy to work with individual Cubans so they can have an opportunity to feed their families and build their economy.
The situation in Mexico is also unstable. The death of the head of what is probably the world's largest drug cartel, Nemesio Cervantes, better known under the name El Mencho, has sparked clashes on a much larger scale than initially anticipated. The situation is so dangerous that many countries are advising against all non-essential travel to Mexico. In just over 100 days, the World Cup will kick off there.
We heard an explosion and really didn't think too much of it because we often hear construction noise, going on around downtown. So thought somebody dropped something or propane tank exploded or something. But then I got up to check it out and saw a big plume of black smoke rising up just a few blocks from us. And then a few minutes later, another big boom a little bit further away from us and another big black column of smoke.
The killing of the cartel boss is part of Mexico's broader security strategy of eliminating the leaders of criminal organizations. It is also the result of U.S. President Donald Trump's policy of cracking down on drug trafficking, primarily cocaine and fentanyl, into the United States. President Trump called me. It was an 8-minute conversation to ask what was happening in Mexico and how I was doing. I also told him how the operation went, that we received intelligence support from the U.S. government, and that the coordination went very well. Now the authorities are trying to restore order. Several thousand additional soldiers have been deployed to prevent further violence, roadblocks, and mass arson of cars and buildings. Several dozen people have been killed in the clashes so far.
Świetnie, już mam. Bardzo dziękujemy.
A QR code instead of a receipt. This is a smart terminal solution that enables direct payments to a phone using a mobile app. Nothing changes for the buyer. They still pay with a card, phone, ring, or watch, but they tap it against the seller's phone.
To pierwsze rozwiązanie w Polsce.
This is the first solution in Poland that is fully integrated with the banking platform, eliminating the need for external equipment and applications. Payments will be possible wherever we buy goods or pay for services. Previously, we entrepreneurs were somewhat grounded by these terminals. We could only provide our services where the terminal, even if portable, could reach. But unfortunately, there was a problem with the signal. The solution means one application and automatic integration with the company's accounting and billing system.
Przedsiębiorca będzie mógł być.
Entrepreneurs will be able to be where their customers are, not where their terminals are. This will allow entrepreneurs to be as mobile as their own customers. Polish entrepreneurs are increasingly using digital financial solutions. Digitization is changing our world by simplifying everyday activities. Access to services is becoming faster and more convenient. But we still need to remember that we are spending real money, although in electronic form.